I'm Danielle Brooks, a 43-year-old black woman, born and raised in Texas. I've worked hard my whole life, running a small catering business, paying my bills on time, and, for the last 7 years, carrying the financial weight of my cousin's family on my shoulders. I never asked for recognition, never demanded thanks, but I always believed family stood together, no matter what. That belief cracked the night Jasmine, my own blood, looked me straight in the eye and said, "Danielle, you're not invited to Christmas dinner this year." The words hit harder than a punch. My chest tightened like someone had tied a rope around it. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd misunderstood her. After all, I'd been the one quietly covering her mortgage when her husband's paycheck fell short. I'd been the one swiping my card to keep her lights on when she'd spent too much on handbags and spa weekends. But no, her tone left no room for confusion. "You know how my husband's family is," Jasmine said, her voice sugar-coated but sharp underneath. "They like things a certain way. Traditional. Classy. Classy. As if my Sunday dinners, filled with soul food recipes passed down from my grandmother, weren't classy enough. As if my skin, my voice, my presence were something to be ashamed of at her long mahogany table. I stood in the kitchen I had practically paid for, with its imported marble countertops and gleaming appliances, and felt something inside me shift. This wasn't just about Christmas. This was about dignity. I had been financing my own exclusion. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. Instead, I pulled on my coat, forced a smile colder than the December wind, and said, "Merry Christmas to you, Jasmine, and to the Carters." As I drove back across the wide Texas night, the mansion lights fading behind me, I knew one thing for sure. If they wanted to erase me from their table, I would write myself into a story they could never escape. Back in my own neighborhood, the glow of Jasmine's gated mansion still burned in my mind. My house was smaller, older, with creaking floorboards, and a kitchen that hadn't seen new appliances in over a decade. But it was mine, paid for by my sweat, my cooking, and the endless hours I spent building a catering business that kept me standing even when life tried to knock me down. I sat at my worn oak table and pulled out a yellow folder stuffed with receipts, bank statements, and scribbled notes. 7 years of sacrifices stared back at me. The $1,900 I sent to cover Jasmine's car payment when she wanted that shiny Lexus. The $5,000 I wired for her emergency trip to Cancun. The countless utility bills paid in silence. Altogether, the number made me sick. Over $200,000. I had convinced myself I was helping family, that one day it would all be worth it. But staring at those papers, I realized I hadn't been helping. I'd been enabling. And now, the reward for my loyalty was exile. The irony burned. Jasmine and her mother-in-law, Mrs. Carter, loved to flaunt their sophisticated lifestyle. They threw garden parties and charity luncheons, posed for pictures in magazines, and spoke about tradition as if they invented it. Yet behind every glass of champagne they poured was my money. That night, a new fire started in me. I was done being the silent benefactor, done swallowing my pride while they dined on my dime. For the first time in years, I thought about what my grandmother used to say, "Respect yourself first, child. If you don't, nobody else will." I picked up my phone, hovered over the bank's number, and smiled. Tomorrow, the transfers would end. Tomorrow, the bleeding stopped. I sat there frozen for a moment after Jasmine's words landed like a hammer blow. The clink of silverware, the faint smell of vanilla candles, even the soft hum of the heater. All of it felt louder, sharper, as if the whole world had tilted. I had expected tension, maybe even a half-hearted excuse, but not a flat-out rejection. I looked around Jasmine's living room, my eyes tracing every detail I knew too well. The velvet curtains I had contributed to when she complained her old ones looked cheap. The polished hardwood floors that had been refinished with money I quietly slipped her after Marcus's last business flop. Even the crown molding she bragged about on social media, another gift, covered by my second job overtime. This wasn't just her house. It was mine, too, piece by piece, dollar by dollar. Yet somehow, I was the one being told I didn't belong in it. Not welcome, I repeated in my head, the words burning into me. I wanted to ask her what gave her the right. Instead, I swallowed hard and forced myself to stay calm. Across the room, Jasmine avoided my gaze, her perfectly manicured nails tapping nervously against her wine glass. She didn't look triumphant. She looked afraid that if she met my eyes, the truth of her betrayal would shine too clearly. I thought about all the years I had been there for her, the nights I stayed up late wiring money to keep her electricity from being cut, the afternoons I babysat her kids so she could chase her dream shopping trips, the weekends I skipped out on my own needs so she could maintain the illusion of a perfect life. And now, after all that, I was nothing more than an inconvenience. A lump formed in my throat, heavy and bitter. This wasn't just about Christmas dinner. This was about erasure. About being told that I was good enough to fund her lifestyle, good enough to keep her secrets, but not good enough to sit at her table when it mattered most. The weight of those years pressed down on me all at once. I wasn't just hurt. I was angry. Angry at Jasmine's arrogance. Angry at Mrs. Carter's silent influence behind her. But most of all, angry at myself for letting it get this far. As I sat there, I made a quiet promise. If Jasmine thought she could write me out of her picture-perfect story, she had another thing coming. I wasn't going to beg for a seat at her table. Not anymore. I stood slowly, my knees aching from years of bending too often. "I see how it is," I said softly, my voice steady, though my chest ached. And before she could respond, I turned and walked toward the door, past the family portraits where my face was either cropped out or shoved to the corner, past the designer coats lined neatly in the closet, purchases made on the back of my sacrifice. As my hand gripped the doorknob, I heard Jasmine murmur my name, almost as if she regretted it. But regret doesn't undo years of dismissal. I stepped out into the cool Texas night air, the December wind sharp against my face. And right there, under the glow of Christmas lights from houses where families gathered in warmth, I realized something. I had been funding my own exclusion, and starting tonight, that was over. The next morning, I brewed myself a strong cup of black coffee and pulled that yellow folder back onto the table. Sunlight streamed through my thin curtains, landing on the stack of receipts and bank statements, like a spotlight on the truth I could no longer ignore. One by one, I began to organize them by year, 2016, the year Jasmine said she couldn't keep up with her mortgage. I had stepped in with automatic transfers, $2,100 a month, thinking it was temporary. By December, I had covered nearly $25,000. 2017. Her medical emergency turned out to be cosmetic dental work. Another $4,000 gone. Add the utility bills that slipped through the cracks, and the total was closer to $30,000. 2018, 2019, 2020. Each year told the same story. I tightened my belt, skipped vacations, passed on updating my own car, all so Jasmine could maintain her image. Altogether, the numbers added up to more than $210,000. The figure sat heavy in my chest, heavier than any insult Jasmine or her mother-in-law had ever thrown my way. I leaned back, staring at the neat stacks. It wasn't just money. It was pieces of my life. Every time I said no to myself, I had been saying yes to them. Every peanut butter sandwich I ate instead of a hot meal, every shift I picked up when I should have been resting, every dream I shelved because family came first. That was the real cost. For years, I had told myself it was love. But love doesn't come with humiliation attached. Love doesn't slam the door in your face at Christmas. My coffee had gone cold by the time I reached the last receipt. I pushed the folder away and exhaled slow. The math was simple, but the lesson was priceless. I had financed not just Jasmine's lifestyle, but my own erasure. That morning, in the quiet of my Texas kitchen, I promised myself this chapter was over. No more silent sacrifices. No more pretending. The bleeding had to stop, and I was the only one who could stop it. By noon, I had made up my mind. The numbers didn't lie, and neither did the ache in my chest. It was time to cut the cord. I reached for my phone, hands steady in a way they hadn't been the night before, and dialed the customer service number printed on the back of my debit card. After the usual menu of button presses and hold music, a calm voice came on the line. "Thank you for calling Lone Star Bank. This is Michelle. How can I help you today?" I cleared my throat. "Yes, I need to cancel an automatic transfer." "Of course, ma'am. Can I have your account number and verification?" I rattled off the details, the numbers I knew by heart, from years of watching them drain into someone else's account. I could almost picture Jasmine on the other side of that transaction, never once thinking about what it cost me. Michelle's keyboard clicked softly in the background. "All right, Ms. Brooks. I see the transfer you're referring to. $2,100, scheduled on the 15th of each month. This has been active since 2016. Would you like me to cancel all future transfers effective immediately?" Her words hung in the air like a lifeline. I swallowed hard. "Yes, cancel it. Starting today." There was a pause, then the sound of more typing. "Done. The transfer has been removed from our system. Is there anything else I can help you with?" I closed my eyes, letting the relief wash over me. For the first time in 7 years, I wouldn't be bled dry on the 15th. "No," I said firmly. "That's everything." When I hung up, the silence in my house felt different. Lighter. I sat at my table, phone still in my hand, and allowed myself a smile. A door had closed, but another one had opened, the door to my own freedom. That evening, I pulled the yellow folder out one last time. The weight of it felt different now. Lighter, almost powerless. I carried it out to the small fire pit in my backyard, the one I usually used for cookouts in the summer. The Texas night was cool, crisp, and quiet. Stars stretched overhead, sharp against the dark sky, as if the universe itself was watching. I knelt by the pit and opened the folder. The papers fluttered in the wind, pages filled with numbers, dates, signatures. 7 years of sacrifice stacked in neat order. Each sheet was a reminder of how much of myself I had given away. My grandmother used to say, "Sometimes you have to burn the past, so it doesn't burn you first." Tonight, I finally understood her words. I struck a match, the flame small but alive in my hand. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me still clung to the idea that family meant unconditional giving, no matter the cost. But then I remembered Jasmine's eyes when she told me I wasn't welcome, the cold dismissal in her voice, and I let the flame fall. The fire caught quickly. The pages curled, blackened, and dissolved into ash. I watched as dollar amounts and check stubs turned into smoke, rising into the Texas night like ghosts leaving my body. With every sheet that burned, I felt something inside me loosen. The anger, the guilt, the weight of years I could never get back. When the last page was gone, I sat back on my heels and exhaled. The air smelled of smoke and freedom. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. I wasn't chained to Jasmine's needs or the Carters' expectations. As the fire died down, I whispered into the dark, "This is the last time you'll ever own me." And I meant it. 2 days after I canceled the transfer and burned the last of those receipts, my phone lit up with Jasmine's name. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered on the 3rd ring, bracing myself. "Danielle," she said without even a hello, "I need you to pick up my mother-in-law and sister-in-law from Dallas-Fort Worth tomorrow. Their flight gets in at 1:30. I'll text you the details." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. After everything she'd said to me, after slamming the door in my face for Christmas, she still had the audacity to call me like I was her personal driver. I stayed quiet long enough for her to rush in with more instructions. "Make sure you're on time. They'll have a lot of luggage, and you know how Mama Carter is about waiting around. And please, Danielle, wear something nice. You represent the family." Those last 3 words, "represent the family," hit me harder than she realized. For years, I had been their silent representative, paying bills, fixing problems, cleaning up messes. But in her world, I was good enough to carry bags, not good enough to sit at the table. "Jasmine," I said slowly, keeping my voice calm, "are you sure you want me there? I thought I wasn't welcome this holiday." There was a pause on the line, a flicker of irritation breaking through her polished tone. "This is different. They expect someone reliable, and you've always been dependable. Just do this for me." I bit back a laugh. The nerve of her. She didn't want me as family. She wanted me as staff. "All right," I said, my voice steady. "Send me the details." Then I hung up, already knowing she had no idea what was coming next. The next afternoon, instead of fighting traffic on I-35 toward Dallas-Fort Worth, I was sitting in a small cafe on the east side of town, sipping a latte I hadn't treated myself to in years. The barista knew my name. The music was soft, and the cinnamon in the air reminded me of my grandmother's kitchen at Christmas. My phone buzzed on the table. Jasmine's text popped up. "They've landed. Where are you?" I flipped the screen face down and took another slow sip. For once, I wasn't rushing to solve someone else's problem. While Mrs. Carter and her daughter wheeled their designer luggage around baggage claim, I ordered myself a slice of pecan pie. It felt almost rebellious, savoring each bite, while I imagined Jasmine's frustration growing with every passing minute. By 2:30, the calls started. First Jasmine, then an unknown number, which I guessed was Mama Carter herself. I let them all ring. The sound didn't rattle me the way it once would have. It was just background noise, like a storm outside when you're safe indoors. At 3 o'clock, I walked out into the crisp Texas air, carrying my to-go cup. For the first time in years, my afternoon belonged to me. Not to Jasmine, not to the Carters, not to their endless demands. Just me. And it felt good. Damn good. By the time the sun went down, the pounding on my front door rattled the frame so hard, I thought the hinges might give. I didn't have to look through the peephole to know who it was. I opened the door to find Jasmine, her mother-in-law, and her sister-in-law standing on my porch like a storm had blown them in. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Jasmine snapped, barging past me without so much as an invitation. Her heels clicked across my hardwood floors like gunfire. Mrs. Carter followed, her fur-trimmed coat still wrapped tight around her shoulders. "This is completely unacceptable, Danielle," she scolded, her voice dripping with superiority. "We waited nearly 2 hours at that airport. 2 hours. Do you know how humiliating that was?" Behind her, the younger sister crossed her arms, glaring at me as though I'd committed a crime. I shut the door quietly and leaned against it, watching the 3 of them whirl around my modest living room, their outrage filling the air. For years, I would have apologized, scrambled to explain, maybe even offered them coffee while I begged forgiveness. But not tonight. "Ladies," I said evenly, my voice cutting through their noise, "this is my house. And in my house, I decide who stays and who goes." Jasmine spun on me, her face flushed. "You embarrassed us. My parents had to get a taxi. A taxi, Danielle. Do you know what that looks like?" I took a step closer, lowering my voice until it was steady steel. "It looks like the first time in a long time. You had to solve your own problems." The room went still. For once, none of them had a comeback. I opened the door again, gesturing toward the night. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got peace to enjoy. You can show yourselves out." And with that, I watched them march back into the dark, their anger trailing behind them like perfume gone sour. 3 mornings after the airport fiasco, I sat at my kitchen table with a steaming mug of coffee, enjoying the rare quiet of a Texas winter morning. The peace was broken by a sharp knock at the door. It was Mrs. Green, my neighbor, holding a rolled-up copy of Texas Living magazine. She gave me a look that carried both pity and warning. "Danielle, you'd better read this," she said before walking away. I unrolled the magazine, and my heart clenched. Splashed across the lifestyle section was a headline that read, "Local woman abandons visiting family during holiday storm." And there it was, my name, printed in black ink for all of Dallas to see. The article described me as unstable, inconsiderate, and even potentially dangerous. According to the piece, I had callously stranded an elderly woman and her daughter at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, leaving them to brave the cold during a severe winter storm. My hands tightened around the glossy paper until it crinkled. A storm? That day had been bright. 65 degrees. Not a cloud in sight. They painted me as selfish, heartless, someone who had snapped. It even included a line about my history of erratic financial decisions, a clear attempt to smear my character beyond repair. Then I saw the quote from Mrs. Carter herself. At our age, being left alone in such conditions was frightening and humiliating. We worried for our safety. Humiliating. That word stuck in my throat like a stone, They weren't humiliated by me. They were humiliated by the truth, finally creeping too close to their polished image. And instead of facing it, they twisted the story into a performance, one that cast me as the villain. I set the magazine down and leaned back, letting the bitterness settle. Clever move, I had to admit. Dallas was a city that thrived on gossip and reputations. With one well-placed article, they had declared war. But what they didn't know was that I had something stronger than their magazine spreads and social connections. I had receipts, literal and figurative. And if they wanted a battle in the court of public opinion, I was more than ready to fight. It didn't take me long to figure out who had orchestrated the article. Jasmine might have played the part of the obedient daughter-in-law, but she didn't have the kind of pull to plant a story in Texas Living magazine. No, this had Mrs. Evelyn Carter written all over it. I sat down at my laptop, the glow of the screen cutting through the dim light of my kitchen. A few keystrokes and searches later, the web unfolded like a map of connections. There she was, Mrs. Carter, plastered across charity websites and society pages. Photos of her at the Dallas Symphony Gala, chairing luncheons for cancer research, shaking hands with city officials at ribbon cuttings. Always dressed in pearls, always smiling that rehearsed smile, the kind of smile that said she never lost a game in her life. But the more I dug, the clearer it became. She wasn't just a socialite. She was a strategist. She sat on the board of 3 foundations, held honorary titles at 2 universities, and, most importantly, was a personal friend of Marjorie Bell, the lifestyle editor of Texas Living. I even found photos of them together at a charity auction, champagne flutes in hand, laughing like old college roommates. So that was it. Mrs. Carter had picked up the phone, whispered her version of events, and within 48 hours, the city was reading about me as if I were some unstable menace who abandoned helpless elders in a storm that never happened. It was ruthless, efficient, and carefully targeted. I leaned back in my chair, letting the realization sink in. They weren't just trying to exclude me from family dinners anymore. They were trying to erase me completely, to stain my name so badly that even outside their circle I'd be marked. But here's what Mrs. Carter didn't count on. I had records. Every transfer, every bill, every begging text message from Jasmine. For years, I'd filed them away without much thought, too busy surviving to notice the pattern I was building. Now, that paper trail had become my armor. They wanted to drag me into a war of appearances, where reputation was the currency. Fine. But I wasn't walking into battle empty-handed. I closed my laptop and set my hands firmly on the table. For the first time, I felt not fear, but clarity. If Mrs. Carter wanted to play chess, I would play chess. And unlike her, I wasn't bluffing with borrowed money and polished smiles. I had the truth, and the truth has a way of breaking even the most careful masks. That night, I transformed my dining room into something between an office and a courtroom. The yellow folder that once symbolized shame now became my weapon. I spread its contents across the table, the papers forming a map of 7 years of sacrifice. First, I pulled out the bank statements. Each one carried the same wound, line after line of transfers to Jasmine's account. $2,100 on the 15th, like clockwork, every month since 2016. I highlighted each entry in neon yellow, the color of warning, until the pages glowed with the pattern of my generosity. By the time I finished, the total stared back at me, over $200,000. Then I moved to the messages. I scrolled through years of texts, my thumb pausing over each plea. Danielle, we're short on tuition this month. The electric bill came in higher than expected. Can you cover it? We just need a little help until Marcus's bonus comes. I screenshot every single one, printing them and arranging them chronologically. The words painted a picture clearer than any article could. I hadn't offered out of pride. I'd been begged, month after month, year after year. Next came the photos. Jasmine had loved to flaunt her life online. I clicked through her Instagram and Facebook posts, printing out glossy images of champagne glasses clinking in Cancun, designer handbags gleaming in restaurant booths, the dream kitchen with imported granite countertops. Next to each image, I stapled the bank statement that showed the payment I had made that same week. A trip to Mexico, paid for by my emergency loan. A $3,000 bracelet, lined up perfectly with a transfer I'd sent to help with utilities. By midnight, the table was covered with neatly stacked packets, statements, screenshots, and photos bound together into a timeline of exploitation. At the top of each stack, I placed a copy of the magazine article with my notes scrawled in red. Lie, false, manipulation. When I finally stepped back, exhaustion settled over me, but so did something else. Calm. This wasn't just proof. It was power. They had tried to rewrite the story with polished words and fake storms. Now I held the real version, undeniable and unforgiving. I closed the last binder, slid it into my briefcase, and whispered to myself, let's see how they handle receipts. On Christmas Eve morning, my house was quiet, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I woke up early, brewed a strong pot of coffee, and laid out the stacks of evidence I had prepared. The dining room table looked less like a home and more like a courtroom. Each packet was neatly arranged, highlighted bank statements, screenshots of Jasmine's pleading texts, photos from her social media posts, flaunting vacations and jewelry, and finally, the magazine article itself with my handwritten notes in red ink. False, misleading, manipulated. I made 15 identical sets. One for every guest I knew would be sitting at Jasmine's Christmas table. They wouldn't just hear my side of the story. They would see it, page by page, dollar by dollar. Then I turned to my closet. If I was going to walk into that mansion full of Carter money and pretension, I would do it looking like the woman they tried to erase. I chose a navy blue dress that hugged me just right, simple pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, and a pair of polished black heels I hadn't worn in years. I wasn't going as the family's scapegoat. I was going as Danielle Brooks, a woman with pride, power, and proof. As I zipped up the briefcase and set it by the door, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. For a moment, I barely recognized myself. Gone was the tired, overlooked cousin who bent over backward for scraps of acceptance. Standing in her place was a woman ready to reclaim her dignity. The Texas sky outside was cold and gray, the kind of weather that made families gather tighter indoors. I slipped on my coat, rested a hand on the briefcase handle, and whispered to myself, tonight, they'll finally hear the truth. And for the first time in years, the thought of walking into Jasmine's house didn't make me shrink. It made me smile. By the time I pulled up to Jasmine's house, The street was lined with shiny SUVs and luxury sedans. Every light in the mansion blazed, and through the tall windows, I could see shadows moving, glasses clinking, and the kind of polished laughter that floats easiest when you're pretending. I parked across the street, took one steadying breath, and picked up my briefcase. The front door wasn't locked. Of course it wasn't. People like the Carters loved to brag about how safe their neighborhood was, as if money could keep out the truth. I stepped inside, the warmth of the house rushing over me, along with the faint scent of rosemary and champagne. The dining room was alive with chatter. Jasmine, glowing in a sequined dress, stood at the head of the long mahogany table, pouring wine, as if she had built that house with her own 2 hands. Her guests, neighbors, friends from the country club, even a local reporter or 2, were leaning in, eager for every word. Then I walked in. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Jasmine's face drained of color, faster than a snowfall in Texas heat. Mrs. Carter's lips pressed into a razor-thin line. "Good evening," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Jasmine set her wine glass down too hard, the crystal ringing against the table. "Danielle," she hissed, "this is a private dinner. You need to leave. Now." But I didn't move toward the door. Instead, I placed my briefcase gently on the sideboard, the click of the clasps snapping open louder than any shout. "Actually," I said, smiling faintly, "I came to bring a gift, the kind of gift that tells the truth." I could feel every eye on me as I reached inside and pulled out the first stack of documents. My hands were steady, my voice even. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one standing on the outside looking in. Tonight, I had walked straight through their front door, and I wasn't leaving until every lie had been exposed. I reached into the briefcase, the rustle of paper suddenly louder than the chatter that had filled the room only moments before. "Before we continue with this beautiful Christmas dinner," I began, my voice carrying across the long table, "I think it's time everyone here knows the real story behind all this, behind the house, the food, even the image you've been sold." The guests shifted in their seats, forks lowered, glasses set down. You could feel the tension crawl across the polished wood table like static. I pulled out the first packet and placed it right in front of a woman wearing pearls, so heavy they looked like they might choke her. "These," I said, "are the receipts. Mortgage payments, utility bills, tuition fees, vacation money. 7 years' worth." Gasps rippled down the line as I moved around the table, laying a packet in front of each guest like a dealer handing out cards. Pages rustled, eyebrows furrowed, and suddenly, the room that had been full of easy laughter was quiet, except for the sound of truth spreading one page at a time. One man, wearing a tailored navy blazer, flipped quickly through his stack. His voice cut the silence. $2,000 every month. For 7 years? That's right, I said evenly. Over $200,000 in total, money I gave to keep Jasmine's family afloat. Money that paid for this very house, for the kitchen renovations you all admire, for the Cancun trip she bragged about online. While I was eating peanut butter sandwiches and patching up an old car, I was bankrolling the Carter's image of perfection. All eyes turned toward Jasmine, whose smile was cracking under the weight of the papers in front of her. "This isn't fair," she said quickly, her voice trembling. Danielle offered, she insisted. I never asked her to. I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. The projector of modern shame. Screenshots. You didn't ask? I raised an eyebrow. Then what are these? I held the phone high, scrolling slowly so each person could see. Danielle, can you cover the utilities this month? We're short on tuition again. Please, just until Marcus gets his bonus. Gasps and mutters filled the room. A woman at the far end shook her head. Jasmine, you told me your husband had gotten a promotion. You said you were finally comfortable. Jasmine's face went pale. She reached for her wine glass with a shaking hand, but barely managed to sip. And then, I continued, sliding another stack onto the table, there's this article. Copies of the glossy magazine, the one that called me careless and unstable, landed in front of the guests. According to this, I abandoned poor Mrs. Carter and her daughter during a winter storm. Funny thing, weather reports show it was 70 degrees and sunny that day. No storm, just a storm of lies. Now every gaze turned toward Mrs. Carter, who sat rigid, her lips pressed so tight they nearly disappeared. We were humiliated, she said finally, her voice brittle. Danielle twisted the story. She's exaggerating. I leaned forward, both palms flat on the table. Exaggerating? Or telling the truth you've spent years burying under your so-called class? My eyes swept across the guests. This family built their reputation on my sacrifice. And when I stopped paying, they tried to erase me, tried to destroy me. But what you're holding in your hands, that's the truth. Line by line, dollar by dollar. Silence spread like wildfire. Guests flipped through the evidence, their faces hardening. Some avoided Jasmine's eyes altogether, while others looked at her with open disappointment. The polished glow she had worked so hard to maintain was gone, stripped bare in a matter of minutes. One man, a longtime associate of Mrs. Carter, cleared his throat. Evelyn, you sat on the board of my foundation. We trusted you. And yet here's proof, clear as day, that everything you've claimed was built on lies. Mrs. Carter's cheeks flushed crimson. For once, she had no clever rebuttal. Jasmine tried one last attempt. Her voice shook as she pleaded, Please, this isn't how it looks. Danielle she's angry. She's trying to ruin us because she feels left out. I shook my head slowly. No, Jasmine. I'm not trying to ruin you. I'm just done letting you ruin me. The silence that followed was heavy, final. The guests weren't fooled. They had seen enough. Their eyes told the story now. Judgment, betrayal, disbelief. I gathered the briefcase, snapping it shut with a sound that echoed in the charged room. Enjoy the rest of your dinner, I said calmly. It's the last one I'll ever pay for. And with that, I turned toward the door, leaving behind the wreckage of their perfect illusion. The room buzzed with uneasy whispers. Jasmine's cheeks flushed as she fumbled for words, her voice brittle. You don't understand. Danielle exaggerates. She's always wanted attention. I shook my head slowly, locking eyes with her. Attention? No, Jasmine. All I ever wanted was respect, and I paid dearly for the scraps of it you dangled. Mrs. Carter straightened her spine, trying to reclaim control. This is disgraceful. To walk into someone's home uninvited and cause a scene. I cut her off. my voice steady as a blade. Disgraceful is using someone's sacrifices and then smearing her in public when she finally says no. Disgraceful is pretending your wealth is built on tradition when it's been built on my bank account. A heavy silence fell. Guests who once praised Jasmine's elegance now looked at her with suspicion. A man in a tailored suit leaned toward his wife and muttered, not quietly enough, "She didn't mention this when bragging about the new kitchen." Jasmine slammed her glass down, wine splattering across the white linen. "You've ruined Christmas," she spat, her voice breaking. "No," I replied softly, gathering the empty briefcase at my side. "You ruined it the moment you decided I wasn't good enough to sit at your table. Tonight, I just told the truth." I walked toward the door, heels clicking on their polished hardwood floor. Behind me, voices rose, demanding explanations, pressing Jasmine and Mrs. Carter for answers they didn't have. The careful facade they had built was crumbling in real time, and I didn't need to stay to watch it collapse. Stepping out into the cold Texas night, I drew in a deep breath. The air smelled of cedar smoke and freedom. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying their weight. I was walking into my own life, head high, unashamed. In the days that followed Christmas Eve, whispers spread through the city, faster than the holiday lights came down. What had started as shocked murmurs around Jasmine's dinner table spilled into phone calls, text chains, and country club gossip. The Carters had always prided themselves on appearances, polished parties, curated reputations, the perfect family portrait. But now, their secrets were no longer secrets. By New Year's, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that two of Jasmine's closest friends had stopped answering her calls. A charity board Mrs. Carter sat on temporarily suspended her duties, citing a need to review reputational concerns. At the country club, where she once held court, people avoided her table, unwilling to be caught in the fallout. The financial strain came next. Without my steady transfers, the cracks showed quickly. Their mortgage payments began to lag. Credit cards ballooned. Vacations disappeared from Jasmine's Instagram feed, replaced by vague motivational quotes that fooled no one. The woman who had once sneered at my modest lifestyle was now drowning in the very debts I used to rescue her from. I didn't gloat, though the temptation was there. Instead, I watched from a distance with a strange calm. They had spent years building their image on my back, and when I stepped away, the foundation collapsed. That wasn't revenge. It was gravity. Neighbors who had once looked down their noses at me now greeted me with a different kind of respect. Subtle, but unmistakable. People had seen the receipts. They knew the truth. And in Texas, where reputation can make or break you, that truth spoke louder than any article Mrs. Carter could buy. The Carters had waged a war of appearances, but appearances can't pay bills, and they sure can't erase the receipts I'd left behind. When the dust finally settled, I found myself sitting on my porch one quiet January evening, wrapped in a blanket, and watching the Texas sky fade from gold to deep indigo. For the first time in years, I wasn't checking my phone for Jasmine's texts or calculating which bill I'd cover next. The silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. I thought I might feel triumphant, maybe even smug, watching their perfect world unravel without me. But what I felt instead was release, a kind of deep, steady calm that came from knowing I no longer owed anyone an explanation, no longer carried the weight of someone else's choices. I poured myself a glass of sweet tea and let the cool air wash over me. My grandmother's words echoed in my head. Respect yourself first, child. If you don't, nobody else will. For years, I had mistaken enabling for love, sacrifice for loyalty. But love without respect is just servitude, and I had finally broken free. When neighbors stopped by to chat, their tone was different now. They looked at me not with pity, but with recognition. They saw a woman who had drawn a line, a woman who refused to be erased. That kind of respect wasn't loud, but it was real. I didn't need to celebrate their downfall. Life was doing that on its own. What I needed was to celebrate my own beginning. Sitting under that Texas sky, I felt lighter than I had in decades. For the first time, my future was wide open, and it belonged entirely to me. It was a gray Thursday afternoon when the knock came. I almost ignored it. I had gotten used to the quiet of my own company, and visitors rarely showed up unannounced. But something in the rhythm of the knocking, hesitant, uneven, made me rise from my chair. When I opened the door, there stood Jasmine. Her sequined glow was gone. She wore no makeup, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, eyes red and swollen from crying. The woman who once towered over me with polished arrogance now looked small, crumpled, like the weight of the world had finally caught up to her. "Danielle," she whispered, voice cracking. "Please. I didn't know where else to go." I didn't say anything at first. I just studied her. The cousin who had once told me I wasn't welcome at her table, who had let her mother-in-law smear my name in glossy pages. Now she was standing on my porch, clutching her purse like it was the only thing holding her together. Finally, I stepped aside. "Come in." She sank onto my couch as though her body had given out. Tears streaked down her face, dripping onto her wrinkled blouse. "We're losing the house," she said, voice trembling. "The mortgage is 3 months behind. Creditors keep calling. Mama Carter won't answer my messages. Even Marcus." She trailed off, choking on his name. "He said maybe it's better if we split up." I sat across from her, folding my hands in my lap. Part of me wanted to feel pity, but another part remembered the years I spent eating peanut butter sandwiches so she could flash diamond bracelets on Instagram. "Jasmine," I said quietly, "for 7 years, I gave everything I had to keep you afloat. And when I finally asked for nothing, just to be treated like family, you shut the door in my face." She broke into sobs, clutching at my hand. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I thought keeping up appearances mattered more than anything. But now I see. It was you all along. You were the one holding us together. Her tears were real, but I knew better than to confuse desperation with love. Still, watching her crumble, I realized something. I didn't need revenge anymore. I already had my freedom. What I had to decide now was whether Jasmine deserved even a sliver of forgiveness. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. The ball was in my court this time, and for once, I had no intention of rushing to save her. For a long moment, I let Jasmine's sobs fill the room. She clutched my hand like a drowning woman, her tears soaking into my skin. Years ago, that kind of desperation would have moved me. I would have grabbed my checkbook, promised her it would all be okay, and carried her burden like it was my own. But not anymore. "Jasmine," I said finally, pulling my hand free. My tone was calm, measured, the way you speak to a child who needs to hear the truth. I forgive you, but forgiveness isn't the same as rescue." Her head shot up, eyes wide. "What do you mean? You won't help me?" "I've already helped you," I answered. $200,000 worth of help. 7 years of my life that I can't get back. And when the one thing I wanted was to be included, to be treated as family, you shut me out. That's not a debt I can pay again. Not with money. Not with my spirit. She shook her head violently, as if trying to erase my words. "But you don't understand. We'll lose everything. The house, the cars, Marcus. He's already talking about leaving. I don't know how to survive this without you." I leaned forward, my eyes steady on hers. "That's the problem, Jasmine. You were never supposed to survive with me. You were supposed to survive on your own. I became your safety net, and you got comfortable falling. Now it's time you learned how to stand." She pressed her hands to her face, rocking slightly. "I can't. I don't know how." "Yes, you can," I said firmly. "Sell the house. Downsize. Get a job that pays for the life you can actually afford. It won't be glamorous, and it won't be easy, but it'll be yours. And maybe for once, you'll understand what real work feels like." Her sobs quieted, replaced by a hollow silence. I could see the weight of my words settling on her, heavier than any bill collector's call. "Danielle," she whispered finally, "are you saying you're done with me?" I softened, just a little. "I'm saying I'm done being your lifeline, but I'm not done being family. If you want to rebuild our relationship, it has to be built on respect, not money. That's the only way forward." She nodded weakly, though I wasn't sure she fully understood. Maybe she never would. But that wasn't my responsibility anymore. I stood and walked to the door, opening it wide. "You'll figure it out, Jasmine. We all do, when we have no choice." She rose slowly, her shoulders sagging under the weight of reality. As she stepped outside into the fading Texas light, I called after her, my voice steady. "This time, Jasmine, you'll save yourself." And then I closed the door. 2 weeks after Jasmine left my house in tears, I found myself at a Sunday potluck, hosted by my neighbor, Mrs. Green. She was a widow in her 60s, with a warm laugh that carried across the street, and she'd invited the whole block. For the first time in years, I showed up not as someone's financial lifeline or hidden benefactor, but simply as Danielle Brooks, a woman bringing her grandmother's cornbread recipe to share. The living room buzzed with chatter. Kids ran across the yard chasing each other with sparklers, and the smell of barbecue filled the Texas air. When I set my dish down on the table, people gathered around with genuine smiles. "Danielle, you always know how to cook from the heart," one of the men said as he reached for a slice. It struck me then how different this felt. No one here expected me to fund their lifestyle or carry their burdens. They valued my presence, my laughter, my food, my company, not my bank account. This was what family was supposed to be. People showing up for each other without conditions, without judgment, without hidden price tags. Later that night, as I sat on the porch with Mrs. Green and a few others, sipping sweet tea under the string lights, I realized something. I hadn't lost family when Jasmine closed the door on me. I had simply found it elsewhere. Real family isn't always tied by blood. Sometimes it's built by love, respect, and shared tables. Looking back, the lesson was simple but hard-earned. Generosity without boundaries is exploitation, not love. Respect isn't something you buy with sacrifice. It's something that must be mutual, freely given. By finally standing up for myself, I hadn't just regained my dignity. I had opened the door to a life that was mine again. And now, I want to ask you, the listener, if you were in my shoes, would you have done the same? Would you have walked away after 7 years of sacrifice? Or would you have given in one more time? Your thoughts matter, because stories like mine aren't just about me. They're about all of us who've ever been asked to give more than we could afford, emotionally or financially. If this story moved you, inspired you, or even made you think twice about your own boundaries, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Because at the end of the day, family isn't about who drains you. It's about who stands beside you when the lights dim and the food runs out. And those are the stories worth telling.